Hello, everyone, and welcome. We are just getting started with the Business of Alt Protein monthly seminar. My name is Audrey Gear, and I am a Startup Innovation Specialist here at the Good Food Institute. And today we'll be diving into sensory testing and consumer research. As we all know, taste is critical to the success of alt protein products. However, it can be challenging to develop products that taste great and succeed on store shelves. So today's webinar will go over the essential product research tools that companies at any size can use. Before we begin, I do have a few housekeeping items. First of all, for those of you who might be unfamiliar, the Good Food Institute is an international nonprofit organization that is developing the roadmap for sustainable, secure, and just protein supply. We identify the most effective solutions, we mobilize resources and talent, and we empower partners across the food system to make alternative proteins accessible, affordable, and of course, delicious. Second, this seminar will be recorded and posted to our YouTube channel. We'll also be emailing everyone a recording of the webinar after the presentation. You can also view previous seminars on our YouTube channel. Third, this seminar will include an audience Q&A for the last part of the hour. Please ask your questions in the Q&A box rather than the chat. That helps us keep track of them better. You are welcome to ask questions throughout the seminar, but we will likely address them towards the end. And last but not least, immediately following the seminar, we will be hosting a virtual networking session via the Meetaway platform. We'll drop the link in the chat that will take you to the registration page where you can sign up if you haven't already. And this is just a great opportunity to meet other professionals in the alt protein industry. You'll be matched with other folks for one-on-one conversations. I know I've met some fantastic people at these virtual mixers and encourage everyone to join us. Just remember, you do need to sign up via Meetaway to access the networking, and this will start at the top of the hour once the seminar ends. So with that, let's dive into today's seminar. I'm so excited to welcome Dragonfly SCI, a sensory and consumer intelligence firm, will present on the essential tools and frameworks you need to know for consumer research. We are joined today by Becky and Anna at Dragonfly SCI, and I will now hand it over to both of you to take it from here.
Well, welcome everyone, and we're excited to be here. I think the mission of Good Food Institute is incredible. It fits very well with our mission of really helping companies unlock that product potential using sensory and consumer research. And there are lots of things that we want to talk about. We're going to give some highlights on, if you look at this front slide too, you notice that everything here doesn't have a brand on it. We're really going to talk about the product experience. And we've talked to marketing folks and say, you can sell anything. You can get consumers to buy anything once. We're trying to help companies to make sure that you satisfy consumers and they really like the product inside the package and they're going to come back. And that's the core essence of what sensory and consumer research can help companies with. So, Dragonfly SCI, we're a group, we're located in the San Francisco Bay Area, also known as Cell Valley. We have an office in Emeryville and in Oakland, Jack London Square, where we do our research. And, our group is really, we've been in this field for a long time, 30 plus years, working with multinational organizations and teaching on these very topics because, they're powerful tools. And, one of the things, really our mission, like Good Food Institute, is create better products that delight consumers no matter where they are. So, when we first started too, like I said, we've worked with major multinationals most of our careers. And when we started Dragonfly, our mission was really to level the playing field and empower smaller producers with these incredibly valuable tools. And they really are. It's sort of, how do you use sensory as a science to start understanding products and consumers and what sensory attributes really delight them versus things that they're not delighted by. And a lot of our work is used to create best in class, or who are you competing with and how do you rate relative to them? A lot of companies say, where do I aim my cannons? I can make anything. I just need some guidance for product development, for marketing. What do consumers really want? Where's the biggest opportunities for success? If you have one product versus a line of products, what should that line look like? And who are you competing with? And how well are you liked relative to those products? So one of the key, we think that one of the key things that most companies don't understand is this sensory language. How do you talk about your products, even amongst yourselves, in your R&D team, in your marketing teams, in your sales organizations, in quality? Do you have a sensory language that really communicates some key differences in the products, and can you map those out? And so this is an example. We're really jumping ahead, sort of diving right into what one of the key elements of sensory science is. And this is a way to have a group of people, a small group of people, come up with a language to describe products. And then you have them rate those products on the intensities. How strong is it in butter flavor? How strong is it in sweet? So you can quantify the perceptions, and you can start looking and mapping different products and where they fit relative to a competitor, relative to a formulation. So you actually get mean values, which is fantastic with replication. This is down here, I've got 12 subjects and 3 replications. It gives us a great database to start correlating with your analytical, physical, chemical measures, with everything, consumer information, anything that you can possibly think of to relate. Does it relate, and where do you want to be? So this doesn't say good or bad right now. What this says is that, you've got products, you have one product that has a very different sensory experience than the other two. So this is a potato product, ease of mashing, butter flavor, sweet taste, all of those things. So that's kind of what a data set would look like. And we can plot it out, and that's the communication tool between R&D and marketing. Where do you want to be? Where are you relative to, other types of things? So that's one of the key aspects that we're going to talk about a little bit in Anna's section. And usually, our role in brand building is great. We use small data. You saw that N of 12 people and 3 replications. That's really 36 data points, but we know that that's repeatable, reliable. That data holds up in a court of law. I can tell you that. We do a lot of ad claims and legal work, but it can be used in so many different ways. And we really want to encourage companies to develop a language that you can talk to each other about. Have some language with definitions and understand the products, because it can be used in so many different areas in that product capability. And one of the key things too is, as you grow and you start improving co-manufacturers, or you bring on new production facilities, you've got a great product in one facility, now you're going to a new facility with different equipment, maybe different raw ingredients. The consumer cares about that sensory experience. Can you create a similar sensory experience using all sorts of different types of equipment and those things? So it's a great tool to understand the product from a very technical standpoint. So lots of applications, they're really unlimited. But in sensory data, it's not like other types of data. We have a lot of twists and turns in this data, because when we talk about people and our measuring instrument, which is very flexible or very different, it's not physical chemical data. We have genetic differences. Some of us are sensitive to bitter, and some of us aren't sensitive to bitter. And there's some simple tests that we can do to do that. And that's a complex topic on its own, because we have at least 25 different bitter receptors and different types of bitter. But we know that people vary dramatically in reactions to things like that. There's nothing you can do to train it out of them. That's just how we're wired. People vary with their experiences and their backgrounds and everything else. So we have to account for that. Products vary. A lot of our work is about product variability, that you don't make the same thing every time, but you also should understand at what point are the products that you're making, they have enough deviation from that sensory experience that they're no longer considered, the match to what your target, what your vision for your product is. So things can vary, but you need to understand, how much and where can they vary, and what drivers really impact consumers and which ones don't. And then methods vary. Sensory is a whole field in and of itself. You'll find a lot of topics out there, but how do you serve the product? What's your serving protocols? What's your serving size? Are you going to add condiments or not? And there are lots of choices that you have to make in your research process to really start developing a good database to make decisions. So, sensory, just a broad overview of what sensory is. It's, we talk about scientific protocols. We're trying to understand, experimental psychology, for example. When we talk about where does that fit into this process, usually an N of 30 gives us some really good numbers to start making decisions. So we look at, what do you tell people before they participate and during the participation? Everything that you communicate to your test subject, either a trained panel or a consumer, impacts their perception. So we want to be careful about, how you set up your study and make sure that you get high quality data. If you use it in experimental design, you can get much farther along and really start developing a beautiful database, following some nice protocols that way. And once you have good data, then you can start doing all sorts of correlations and relationships and understand consumer perception. So that's at a high level. That's, most of these multinational companies have 50 to 100 plus people doing this sensory and consumer research. It's very powerful. It's a very valuable tool. And we want to bring these techniques down to the entrepreneurs and to other folks and say, it's not out of reach. There are some things that you can do to really understand your products much better than what you might do today. So we talk about the value of pre-search, that, when you start doing real sensory data and you start collecting information or measuring things, you don't want to start too soon. You want to make sure that you've got the right products. You've got, you immerse the team in the product sensory experience to determine what information do you need to get to the next step. So, we talk about a structured small group evaluations, and this is pre-search. It's before you start really collecting actionable data, but there's a lot you can do with smaller groups. And, everything is unbranded, right? You're just looking at what's the product experience delivering. In this case, a variety of breakfast cereals that you're smelling. And, maybe one has a little bit more vanilla, one has more almond, one has fewer pieces, it's darker in color, it's a little thicker, has more visual texture, lots of different things that you can start describing and developing that language. But at this point, you're not looking at statistics, you're just trying to say, are the products ready to go to the next phase, or can we make a decision just based on that? So you determine, what's the next step from this. A lot of times they're used for when you don't have, you can't afford, or you don't think that it's practical or feasible to do hypothesis-driven product evaluations. Maybe the decision risk is small. You don't have the resources for more formal tasting. But when it comes to making the stakeholders feel comfortable, I know that most leadership teams do like to see data to make it. It depends on the level of risk that you're making, but we do that. One of the big things that we use it for is an initial screening step before further product evaluation. When we're looking at a category, what's your competitive set? How broadly are you looking? And we talk about share of stomach. Well, if they buy this, what are they going to replace to buy this product? So, think about what else might it compete with, but it's really a beautiful way to start looking at initial screening step and narrow down to a subset of products that you want to take to the next step for testing. There's a great book I put down here. ASTM has a standard guide for structured small group evaluations. It's a relatively new book. It's E3093, and it's from 2020. And it's not an inexpensive book. It's a very good book that I would recommend that you look at. And if you're interested in doing some small group structured evaluations, it gives good kind of step-by-step instructions. So what we've decided to do is, we're introducing a research essentials because we know that some of these, once you start going out and working with agencies to recruit consumers and do all of this testing, a lot of companies aren't ready to do that yet. We think that you haven't done pilot work, do some smaller scale stuff before you scale up to do larger validation studies. And if you have the big risk decisions, or you need a lot of data. But one of the things that we've developed over the last 5 years is more of a casual situation testing. It's a do-it-yourself toolkit for small group consumer engagement product flights. And a lot of times, if you go to and this is about liking, do consumers really like your product relative to a couple of other products? So we've come up with this thing I'll show you here. It's a very simple, when you go and you get a flight of products, you can put 3 products here and you balance and rotate the order. So with products and about 50 consumers, 30 or 50 consumers is a great pilot test. This is a paper pencil activity that's designed for in-person, if you have a tasting room, a casual bar situation, somewhere where your consumers engaged, and you can do this paper pencil. If you can calculate means and frequencies, you can look at these scales and get some very powerful information. Again, paper pencil, very inexpensive. There are parameters around here that you need to consider when you do the testing and set it up properly to get high quality data. But the scales are the three most important scales that we've used in our career to help major companies. And do consumers like it? So we have overall opinion, from dislike extremely to like extremely. That's a very common scale used in our field. We also have purchase interest and meets expectations. And this meets expectations is, what did the consumer think they were going to get versus what did you actually deliver to them? And we leave a little room for likes and dislikes. And there are other things that you can do, but like, this is the most basic thing that you can get. And from that, you can actually calculate a really nice, here are 3 different products, and it may not tell you always the winner, but it's going to tell you which one should not move forward to validation testing. And so, in this case, we would say, of the 3 samples, maybe you've got 3 prototypes, or maybe you've got 1 competitor and your current product and a prototype. But it's a good way to start looking before you start spending money on the validation. Do you have something worthy of going to that next step and really investing in that research for the leadership team? So from that, I'm going to let Anna take it from here. She is the Director of Research Essentials, and really excited to just continue on and share kind of the things that we're working on to help smaller companies be better out there and make products that really consumers like, and you can provide data to demonstrate that.
Thank you, Becky. Also, good morning, good evening, good night. I don't know. I know there's a lot of people coming from all over the place today. So I'm going to go a little bit deeper into kind of the stuff that we were just reviewing, a little bit more information on how to run successful consumer tests, as well as successful sensory tests, and what are those essentials for that type of research. So we're going to start with the thoughtful research design. So creating a framework and where you're going to start. So the first thing, before you even want to get into the whole point of even doing research, is you need to define your business objectives. So what kind of value are you trying to get from your sensory and consumer research? What are you trying to achieve? How are you going to measure success with your product or with your research? How would you use your data to make changes? All of these kinds of questions are important to think about before you begin your research, so that you can design your research in such a way that you're going to get the data that you need to answer those questions. Next slide. So you'll need to obviously have your test products, and you'll need to choose a methodology to do this. So you'll want to choose products that are going to test your business question. Sounds obvious, but it can be a little bit more difficult than that. You want to make sure that all of your other variables besides the test variables are controlled. So what that means is control things like the raw materials, the product age and freshness, serving protocols, storage conditions, the way you prep the product, the orders, the balancing those serving orders. The problem is, if you don't control these things, they can confound, they end up being called confounding variables. They can confuse the data. They can make it so that you don't know if your answer actually, or if your data actually answers the question that you went out to test. So if your question is there a noticeable difference? Click. You'll want to do discrimination testing or duo trio. If you want to know how are they different, you'll want to do descriptive analysis or QDA, which is a qualitative descriptive analysis. These are the methods that we recommend for these types of data analysis. Which consumers, what are your consumers liking and purchase behavior? Will that change, or is that something that is your product going to meet those expectations? You'll want to do consumer testing. You'll use trifecta scales, which Becky alluded to, but I'm going to go a little bit more detail into what those trifecta scales are later. And then if you want to know those key drivers of liking, so what do consumers need out of your product in order to really optimize your product's liking and your product's ability for success, you'll want to combine those descriptive tools as well as the consumer testing tools. Next. So one thing that we like to drive home through our different webinars and when we're speaking to our clients is really, you need to make sure that you're using qualified subjects. If you're someone who has a scientific background, you often know, okay, you have to have, you know, a calibrated instrument. You need to make sure that you're using the correct instrument for whatever assay you're doing. It's the same thing for consumer and sensory testing as well. The people are your instruments. So you want to make sure that you're using the right people. You want to make sure that you're screening for sensitivity if you're doing sensory testing. You also want to make sure that you're screening for whether or not someone's a target consumer if you're doing consumer testing. If you use just, go back. If you're using just anyone, you could end up with having a whole bunch more error in your product design or in your test design, because 30% of the people can't even discriminate above chance. That's even within people who love your product and are high frequency consumers. And so when you have unqualified people, you're increasing your risk of making an incorrect decision. All right, go ahead. So some of the ways that we account for this variability that we were discussing earlier is by doing some different things with our test design to make sure that we end up with still very clean data. People do vary, we recognize that, and then we create a design that's going to make sure that we account for that and that we still get good, clean data that we can make really, solid decisions off of. So we use a panel of qualified subjects that are all screened for their sensory acuity, or at least screened for their ability as a target consumer, or as they fit as a target consumer. We're going to qualify them based off their product use and sensory skill. We're going to use a balanced block serving order. So what that means, it's not just a random serving order. Randomization can end up with some unbalanced designs. What balancing means is that you're going to have the same, or each product is going to be presented in the same position an equal number of times, and in a different order each time, or a balanced order. Then you're going to require a response so that you have tests or forced choice tests. So you're not going to allow people to say, oh, I don't know, or no preference or anything like that. We also use repeated trials. So we're not just going to test each person once, we're going to test them multiple times. By having those multiple trials, we're going to get better data and more informative data. And then we're going to monitor the performance of the subjects over time. So that way we can make sure that our subjects that we're using for our sensory tests are reliable. So let's go a little bit more deep into sensory research. And these are different tools that you can use to understand the perceivable qualities of your product. So this is not about consumer testing. This is about the sensory experience. So a very common tool is discrimination research. It's very simple. It's very, there's just one question. You're answering, are these products perceptually different? So an example of this would be the use of the duo trio, which is our recommended methodology for discrimination research. You might have heard of triangle tests before. That's a very common one. We actually prefer the duo trio because it kind of brings people back to the way that they really truly are experiencing products. They're going to take a product that they're going to taste and they're going to compare it to their past experience with that product. So what the duo trio does is it says, here's a reference, and now here's two products. Which one is the same, is most similar to that reference? So from this test, you're going to understand, is there a perceivable difference between the change that you've made or the two different products that you have presented? Sometimes with that discrimination research, you can have a constant reference if it's something where you have a control that you don't want to change, or you can balance that reference to be either one of those products. We're not going to go into all of those little details since we don't have a ton of time this morning or today. So, but that's one of the tools that's in your tool belt. Next slide. Another very powerful tool would be the quantitative descriptive analysis, QDA. So descriptive analysis is going to give you this wonderful spider chart. and it gives you information on the perceivable intensities of different attributes. So you're going to see a map of products. So as you can see from this one, prototype A and prototype B are pretty similar, but they're both pretty different from the control for both crisp texture and amount of blisters. And this looks like this was probably from a potato chip. So you can see from this information that neither one of those prototypes is reaching that crisp texture and the amount of blisters that we would want from this product. So you can use this information then to help you with product development. So you can say, okay, if we want to increase the crisp texture and the amount of blisters, maybe we need to fry it a little bit more at a higher temperature. The product development team can use that information to then help them make adjustments to their formulations. You can also use it for cost reductions, shelf life, understanding how your product changes over time, identifying key sensory attributes, using it for specifications. Also handing off your product profile to QC so that when your product is being made at a plant level, the quality control team can make sure that your product is still meeting all of those sensory attributes and at those intensities that your consumers have grown to expect. You can also use it for advertising claims. As Becky said, this can all hold up in the court of law as long as our our research design is done effectively and correctly, then we can go ahead and it can hold up in the court of law. And competitive intelligence as well. So understanding how your product compares to your competitor, understanding the market as a whole. You can also correlate it to consumer data, as I'll kind of go into a little bit further, and also just a whole bunch of uses. I mean, this information is really, really helpful for a lot of different uses. So one thing that you can do with this qualitative descriptive analysis data is not just an individual product profile, but you can use this information to create a product map. So this is principal component analysis. What it does is it's a data reduction technique that allows you to see your products or the products that you've tested and how they compare to one another on a couple of different factors. So you have in this particular slide, you can see that the x-axis is bitter drying to less bitter and brown sugar aroma. And then the x-axis is citrus sour to roast earthy. So that horizon line, you can kind of see that is where a lot of our brand, if you look at that circle, you can see that the products kind of vary on the citrus sour to roast earthiness, but they're all in that bitter and drying kind of quadrant, and they're all mostly in the roast and earthy section. So you can see pretty quickly from this data that there really is this house palette within that brand of products. And you can see too how it differs from other products within the market. So you can see how it differs from the main competitor, which the main competitor seems to be pretty similar for most of their products, but one of their products is out here in this bottom right quadrant where it's less bitter, but still roasty. And then you can also see these other specialty items and how they differ from your particular brand. So then now that's a very brief, very quick overview of the different tools that are available to you for sensory research. And those are just a few of the tools that are available to you. So now I'm going to go into consumer research. So for consumer research, use this data to understand your consumers' opinions. So you're going to want to screen your subjects for whether or not they're a target consumer. So go ahead to the next slide. So there are different types of target consumer. You have your core target as well as your opportunity target. Your core target consumers are people that are already users of the particular category. And your opportunity target are people that are interested in your category, that are really interested in purchasing it. And they might even be interested in the brand, but not necessarily the product within that brand. So you want to make sure, like for consumer or for sensory testing, where you're screening your subjects for their acuity, for consumer testing, you're screening your subjects for their interest in your product. If people aren't interested in your product, you don't want to know whether or not they're going to buy it. If they're not even interested in the idea of it, they're going to say, well, no, of course I wouldn't buy this product. And then it's just adding a bunch of error to your data. Go to the next slide. So Becky showed you the Dragonfly, which is a great tool for using for consumer pre-search testing. So consumer testing can be very cumbersome, very long, can take a lot of time, a lot of resources, high key money. So we have provided this tool called Dragonfly that really provides you the framework to run these pre-search tests to give you a lot of good information to help you with your further research designs. So the next test, or next slide, I mean. So we use the Dragonfly, uses the trifecta scales. So I alluded to these earlier. Those trifecta scales are overall liking, purchase interest, and meaning expectations. So overall liking is going to understand, okay, does your consumer like your product? Purchase interest tells you, are they gonna buy it? And meaning expectation says, does it meet the expectations of the information that you have communicated to them? People don't often think that this is, they might exclude this from their information, but it's actually quite important. I kind of like to joke about how when I was a kid, my brother, as being an older brother, decided or gave me a jar of Vegemite and said it's chocolate sauce. And I said, oh, yum, chocolate sauce. And I took a big spoonful of the Vegemite. And if anyone has ever had Vegemite, it is very different from chocolate sauce. So even if maybe I would have liked Vegemite, I certainly did not like it in this situation. So it really did not meet my expectations. So it really does, what you tell your consumer and what you tell your market really does make a difference in their overall liking in the end. So it's important that your product meets those expectations. In addition to these trifecta scales, which are scales that multinationals are using, all sorts of different companies are using to make decisions, we also use the Dragonfly to gather open-ended comments, which can help you understand if there's similar comments, anything that might jump out to your consumer. Also demographics, just some simple ones of age, gender, and use frequency, just so you can understand who you're testing with. And then you can also use the Dragonfly to do some bonus information of choice behavior, where you tell your consumer, hey, you can take one home for free. And then you can see, okay, which one do they actually end up choosing? That can kind of give you an even more of an insight into their future purchase behavior. Next slide. So here's an example of those pre-search results. This is the same graph as what we were using before earlier in the slides. This time I kind of adjusted it a little bit to, I'm going to show you a story of how we can kind of go through some information with consumer research to really understand your product and its potential. So you can see that we've tested in this particular Dragonfly, we've tested a store brand, a premium brand, and our target profile, so the item that we would want to reach. And you can see that the target profile is done pretty well, but surprisingly, the premium brand did not do so well in the store brand, and it did pretty similarly to the store brand. So we can use this information to then say, okay, maybe our target profile is the right way to go, but we expected it to do more similarly to the premium brand. Maybe there's something else that we need to kind of look into. So we can then do, once we've looked at this information, this can give us an idea, but often we will then want to do a validation study results or validation study in order to understand even further into what our product market is like, where we want to go. And we'll do competitive benchmarking. So next slide. So with competitive benchmarking, what you're going to do is you're going to say, okay, let's test 6 products. And we're going to use that information to really understand what our liking profiles are like and what the products are like. So this was for a beverage. So you can see again, the premium brand, the target profile were both tested in here as well. And you can see that the premium brand, still didn't really do so well. It did a little bit better than in our Dragonfly, but still not so great. And the target profile still did pretty well. But you can see that there's a product in there called it Market Surprise, where it did very well. And maybe with this target profile is not quite where we want to go. And we can use this information to then see this. The benchmark line is that yellow line there at 7 out of 10, or sorry, 7 out of 9 for the overall opinion. Is then saying, okay, yes, these people really like this product. And you can see that the market leader, the target profile, and the market surprise all meet that benchmark, but the market surprise is highest. You'll see these little letters on the top. Those are significance numbers, or significance groupings. So the market surprise is significantly liked over the rest. The market leader and the target profile are similar, then low price leader and importer are similar, and then the premium brand is the least liked and is in its own category. But then this is just the overall. Then you want to go into the preference segments. So one of the great things about doing a larger study and doing these validation studies is that you can really then dive deep into really where are people at. So you'll see the total population on the far left here, where it goes from market surprises at the top, premium brands at the bottom, just like we saw. But then you'll notice that things start to change once you start to segment your market into 3 different segments. So you'll see that the market surprise still does very well for segments 1 and 2, but then it did very poorly in segment 3. Segment 3 is 17% of the population. So it's not the biggest segment, but it is a segment. So you'll notice that that market surprise would not do well if you're trying to reach that segment number 3. Now, if you're trying to reach as many people as possible, segment 1 and 2 correlates to about 76% of the population. And that market surprise does very well. But you'll also notice too that premium brand that did not do well with the total population. And that's because if you look at segment 1, it did very poorly. That premium brand, segment 1 does not like it. However, segment 2 likes it a lot. Things switch, things change. And you can see that segment 2 likes that premium brand a lot more. And if you're trying to reach segment 2, maybe that premium brand is still where you want to go. So you can get some really fascinating information here when you separate it out into preference segments. Next slide. So one of the things that I think is the most exciting thing about sensory and consumer research is that when you put them together, you get some really fascinating insights and some really, really useful information for helping with product development, as well as competitive understanding, and really where you want to go next. So, or where you want to aim your cannons. One thing that people love using is something called the JAR scale, or just about right scale. And and people love to do penalty analysis. This is something that's very common, very well known in the industry, very popular. But we have found that it's not quite clear enough or enough information for product development teams to actually make an appreciable and useful change to the product. So this is an example of penalty analysis that's done with the same information that we were just looking at before. So the same product set beverage. And you can see that these penalty analysis, anything that's on that above 0.5 is pretty high. What that means is that it's changed the liking enough that these people find it to be an issue with the product, that it really changes their overall liking. And you can see that the amount of fruit flavor is not enough, the sweetness is not enough, the acidity, tartness is not enough, or is too much, and the amount of flavor is not enough. There's a lot of, it's not very clear. So then if you take though that preference segmentation information that I just showed you, as well as taking the qualitative descriptive analysis, so those spider plots that we showed you before, you can really then understand better the key drivers of liking and really where you want to go. So next slide. So you'll notice here that we then used the qualitative descriptive analysis information, as well as the consumer data and those segmentations. So segment 1, 2, and 3, just like in our previous information. And you'll notice that there are enhancers of liking, so the things with the plus sign, and detractors of liking, which are the things with the minus sign or in yellow. And you'll see that segment 1, what they really like is stuff that's on the sweeter floral wines, while segment 2 likes things that are sour and citrusy, that have more astringency. And segment 3 are really people that like things just kind of middle of the road, nothing too crazy. And so you can see that we've also then been able to correlate this information to some analytical data. So that very bottom row there is residual sugars in that particular beverage. And that provides you information to say, hey, if we're trying to get for segment 1, that residual sugar should be high. They really like their beverage to be sweet. And so you can use that information to then drive that product development. It's much more clear, much more directive information. Next slide. This is another way to go ahead and look at this information where you map the product based off of their segments and an understanding of these, their different preferences within that segment. So these are, this graph shows you segment 1 and segment 2, which are showing the majority of the population, so 76%, where it maps their liking. So on a liking scale up to 9. And you'll see that, you know, the low price leader and the import are not very well liked by either segment. Premium brand is well liked by segment 2, but not by 1. And then this market surprise in this opportunity section where the liking is high for both segment 1 and segment 2 is where that market surprise is living. Often you can see then that is where you want to aim your cannons. That's where you're going to get the biggest bang for your buck. And you can see too as well, like, all right, these ones that are this premium brand for segment 2, because we know that segment 2 likes their citrus, sour, astringent wines, you can kind of provide that information there. And then this sweet floral stone fruit for segment 1, you can see that the market leader and their target profile are really fitting in there. So if you see this target profile and you say, okay, that's where we thought we wanted to go. And maybe you still want to go there. You're still going to get a lot of people. You're still going to get 50% of the population, but maybe you actually want to move your product a little bit closer to that market surprise and maybe actually get a little bit of that segment too to come on board with your product. So this provides so much information for your product development teams and your marketing teams to communicate and capture those consumers that you want to capture. So that, like I said, is super fast overview. I just want to show you a couple of selected references of these are different things that Dragonfly has been involved in. If you're wanting to learn more, these are great places to go, great places to start. Like we said, ASTM has some really useful information there, as well as these different books. And we also have, Becky runs the Applied Sensory and Consumer Science Certificate Program. There's just a lot of information that you can get out there. Next slide. ASTM, as we discussed before, these are some great resources within that to help you understand the best ways to run your research. In the next slide. And so with that, that's our presentation for today. It was a lot of information, a lot of very high level. If you're wanting to contact us for any more information, this is where you should go, dragonflysci.com. You can contact any of us at any time. We would love to chat with you. And thank you all so much. And now we'll take your questions.
Thank you so much, Anna and Becky, for such a fantastic presentation today. It was incredibly informative. Just a reminder to everyone, if you do have questions, please pop them in the Q&A box. That will help us sort through them and see them. So feel free to go ahead and start doing that now. But to get us kicked off, I had a few questions that I jotted down when you were going through this. And I wanted to know, how often should you engage in sensory testing? Is it only when launching a new product or switching to a new co-manufacturer? When should people think about doing this in their product development cycle?
All the time. I know. I think that, you know, it like we said, pre-search can really help you at the beginning, helping you kind of fail early and often at that beginning stage. And then you can, once you start getting things a little bit more solidified, you can use it to then, you know, do that product development. But then we didn't even go through the whole QC part of sensory science and consumer science. I mean, once you have that product is established, there's a lot that you need to do in order to maintain it. I mean, consumers, once they like a product, they want it to stay the same. And so it's really important that you keep it the same. And so there's a lot of wonderful QC tools out there as well.
But I would chime in on that too, that I think it's valuable at every stage. And we see so many companies that get ready to launch and then they do a validation study, having all of their launch plans in place, and the product doesn't succeed. You know, it really doesn't meet. And so it changes timelines. So we say, do it early. I mean, start early in that process and understand what you're trying to make, what kind of, how do you describe that? How do you talk about that with each other? How does it fit relative to your competitors? And you know, really engage and love your product. I mean, know it intimately and what your consumers think on a blind basis. You don't, you know, when you start giving too much information, then you can alter their perception. You really want to understand, can that product succeed out of the package in someone's home, you know, without a lot of hype around it.
Absolutely. So I'm seeing some questions flowing in here. Let's see. Do you have any tips for a startup hoping to launch a new product by the end of the year? What are the most important things to consider when doing sensory and consumer research in that sort of timeline?
I would want to know for sure, you know, have you done any consumer research? Do you have some take the products out and actually get them in use with consumers and gather some hard data to start making those decisions relative to what you think you're competing with, you know, and have your messaging. I mean, we talk about, you know, we're so focused on the product experience, but we can also help marketing. What messaging do you want to put on the package to really convey different sensory experiences? You know, smooth and chunky for peanut butter. That's a great, you know, it's a great, but those really provide different sensory experiences. It's very clear on the label, and companies that are able to communicate a little bit more about that sensory experience are more successful. You know, consumers can find what they're looking for and have some differentiation. And but I think you really have to gather some data. You know, if I was an investor on a startup and you're saying you're going to launch a product, I would want to see at least a Dragonflight data set relative to your key competitors. Why should I invest in this? Is it, you know, do consumers really like it relative to something else?
Thanks. And how about selecting the right people for your sensory testing? What kind of filters should people be using to select those right people? And kind of piggybacking off of that, how can the right perception attributes for an evaluation be defined or chosen?
So yeah, I didn't really go deeply into the screening, but really you want to make sure that everyone that you use for your sensory evaluations have a high level of sensory acuity. So what you're going to do is you're going to take those people and you're going to run them through several different sensory acuity tests. You're going to do a bunch of different duo trios, a bunch of different discrimination tests, all within your category of interest. You don't want to just be like testing popcorn when you're going to be doing beverages. That doesn't make any sense. You want to make sure that they understand or that they can discriminate within your category across different modalities. So aroma, appearance, texture, flavor, all of those different things, as well as across different difficulties. So you can say, okay, they got to at least be able to do the easy ones, but we want to see, can they also do the hard ones as well? So you would use that information to then select the appropriate people to do your evaluations. And that's for sensory testing. Now for consumer testing, you really want to make sure that they're the target consumer. That's the important part there. But for the attributes, once you have your sensory panel in place, what they're going to do is they're going to evaluate the products that you're interested in and provide the language for you if you're following the QDA protocol, which is what we recommend. It allows the panel to then say, okay, they're going to evaluate the array of products. They're going to say, okay, these are the different things that I notice. They're going to work together to define those attributes, and then they're going to rate them in Replicate and provide that data. I mean, that's a super fast overview. If you really want to understand more, please contact us.
Thank you. And is there a different approach that you would take with alternative protein products compared to typical products? And what if a competitive set is not well represented enough to run a DOL type study?
Well, I think that this is sort of a common theme. I know with alt proteins, the consumer, like, who are you trying to target? You're trying to target vegans, or you're trying, there's so many different types of consumers that are looking for these things, flexitarians. I think you have to be clear in who you're recruiting to get that information. What is their competitive set? What else are they purchasing? And how likely are they to purchase your product? How does it fit in their diet and their shopping experience? Because you want to get core, we always talk about who's the biggest opportunity that you can go after. Make sure you can satisfy those, right? Satisfy those first, and then you can start looking at opportunity targets. But, if you don't have something that's, you have to satisfy this core group to move forward, or it's not going to fly. And there may be a couple of different targets, but I think you determine who those are with your marketing team. What are they currently buying? What are their habits? And how do you recruit those people and then get their impressions? It's not just general population and throw it out there and think everybody's going to compare it to the regular, meat analog or animal counterpart. It may be they're comparing to some other types of products. So I think you have to, it's a complex world, but you have to, that's what that pre-search is designed for. Bring in a competitive array and as a team sort out, well, these wouldn't really compete in this space, or it's a lot of that noodling around. There's no cookbook approach. You have to think about your objectives and who you're trying to reach and what your product's designed to deliver.
That's really interesting, because we just had another question come in asking if alternative protein companies should be doing sensory testings or sensory tastings with competitors' products, other alt protein products, or with animal-based products. But from what I'm hearing you say right now, it should be a mixture of both, since many of these companies are targeting the flexitarian consumer who are eating both types of products.
Well, and just make sure that if you recruit the consumers and they're non-meat eaters, you don't give them meat. You give them, you recruit so that they like the products that you're going to be serving, and they, you give things blind and you really let them react to the product experience. May not be what you want to hear, but it really does deliver that key insight to make it better if you need to.
Got it. And from your experiences doing so many different types of tests and working with all different kinds of consumers, do you think that flexitarian consumers are ready for new alternative protein products? Or are we still too far away from using them as a key preference segment or early adopters?
I think you have to test it. You have to understand, you want to put that in front of them and let the consumer tell you. I think that a lot of it has to do as well with the communication, like Becky was saying before, that if you want to make sure that your communication to those consumers is such that it does meet their expectations, it delivers the product in the way that they expect it to be. And if there's someone who's a meat eater and you're telling them this tastes just like meat, you want to make sure that it meets those expectations. But if you're telling them, this is a way for you to reduce the amount of meat with still getting, a lot of those key drivers of your liking of meat, maybe you say this is going to deliver on these particular attributes of meat, but you're also then now reducing your consumption.
Well, and figure out how you define flexitarian, because I wouldn't just ask them if you're a flexitarian. It's like, which of these foods do you normally eat? Beef, pork, chicken, and then you can start giving some other brand, put some alt things in there and look for the frequency and the usage patterns that you're looking for to define your own flexitarian. What else, what share of stomach, what else are they eating that you could take a share of? Because, I think that term flexitarian is so broad. Yeah. So you really have to define it further to get high quality data.
Absolutely. And going back to what we were talking about a little bit earlier around test subjects for these types of tests, how exactly do you screen for sensory acuity of a test subject? Is it a survey question? Do you have them taste something and give you feedback on it? Like, what does that look like exactly?
Well, I feel like I should have spent more time on that.
Well, I took that slide out actually, because, every company should develop a set of screening tests to really develop a sensory acuity thing. We're doing screening for a new panel today. We're adding more people to our panel. So we do this regularly. And we do a lot of different products. So we come up with tests that we think are easy and moderate and difficult. And we have an array of 10 tests that we give. So each person that tries out for the panel actually competes 20 scorecards. So we know, did they get it right on the first trial? So it's 10 tests with a replication. And we look across that, how many tests did they get correct? How many scorecards did they get correct? And we look at out of those 20 tests, which ones have the highest sensory acuity. Some people get everything correct. Some people just do it no better than chance. I mean, in the duo trio test, you get a 50-50 shot of just guessing, right? But we look above and beyond that. It has to be a significant, find that difference more often than not, because we want to have a pool of people that are screened and have sensory acuity, because we're looking to minimize beta risk. So if you make a difference in a product that you're happy with this product, you lost your supplier or you found a less expensive supplier of an ingredient, you want to make that change, save some money, but still deliver that same sensory experience. So when we do that, that's a high risk thing. You don't want a consumer to say, hey, you've changed this. You want to be able to understand that before a consumer comes to you. So we say you need to have a pool of people that are screened and qualified, that if the difference exists, they can pick it up. They've done it before, we know they have known sensory acuity. So we trust that group that if they don't pick it up, then the consumer also is very likely not to pick it up. You always get those 1% that can pick up everything, but you're looking for a bigger picture, and you're going to satisfy most people by making that change.
Thank you. That's very interesting. It makes me want to test my own sensory acuity.
Come on down to Oakland today and we'll do it.
Great. And could you talk a bit about, are there any lessons that you have learned from other companies that you've worked with around how you make foods more craveable, that don't just rely on fat, salt, sugar, umami? Are there other things that you've seen out there that work to make people desire products more? Or is that something that you even look at in the work that you do?
Well, I think, the preference segment information, we do a lot of that preference segment that Anna showed you, because a lot of companies just stop at total population. They'll do a small consumer test, ask the just about right scales. And it's really, you're kind of working with a not very precise target. So when we start looking at a category of products, and more than 6, we like to see 12 to 14. And you can really start understanding, this is what the major multinationals do, right? They screen, they develop, they get the category, they understand preference segments, and they really satisfy those segments. So if you have one product, what should it be? If you can have a second product or a third product, you can satisfy each segment very beautifully. That, the key drivers, they may have some common attributes, but they're not overlapping. Those segments are unique for a reason. And that data really provides a core direction and a sensory target. If you can hit that target, you can bring out 3 different products that satisfy those consumers in a way that you're not going to be a me too. You're really going to have something unique and special that really delights those consumers. So innovation happens for us when you can do a larger study, you get the preference segments, and really start building on that. And it gives clear direction to the product development team and marketing.
Yeah, like kind of alluding to the data that I showed, you can see that in segment 1, they really liked sweet beverages, but then in segment 2, it was almost the opposite. So it's not just sugar that drove liking. And segment 2 was still 26% of the population, which is still a large quantity of people. So you don't want to ignore them. And you saw that there was that one product that kind of satisfied both. It must have been not so sweet that you eliminated the segment 2, but it was still sweet enough that you grabbed segment 1 as well.
Great. I think we have time for one more question today. Does Dragonfly have panels that execute QDA and the spectrum method?
QDA, yes. Spectrum, no.
Well, we've got a panel. So we are in Emeryville, and we've got a panel. We use culinary experts, actually, and we started doing that when we started Dragonfly in 2017. And they're really, we love these groups because the culinary professionals come with their language skills. They learn from each other. They're really into the whole process, and they know that they're helping product developers in this thing. So we a lot of companies don't have a language to describe their products. So we do Zoom sessions, and we have the clients taste alongside with our panel. So you can listen to their discussions while they're tasting along. Then we provide the full language, the definitions, and then the product fingerprints of that product array. So even one session for companies, we do a 3-hour session. So we do first hour and a half is language development, second half is data collection. And we provide, you can get through 4 to 6 products in that 3-hour session and really provide a tremendous value to the organization, from language, how it fits and all of that. We don't do spectrum. I mean, we are a QDA house. So.
Great. Well, Becky, Anna, thank you so much. That's about all we have time for today. Thank you everyone for joining. Remember, we will be sharing a recording of this via email, and we'll also be posting it to GFI's YouTube channel, so you can come back and revisit all of the amazing information that was shared today. And please join us over on Meetaway to continue the conversation, everyone. Bye.
Thank you, guys.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you.